They say death gives warning when it comes, but for my mother it arrived without knocking. What I didn't know on that cold morning was that along with death a monster of flesh and blood would enter our home, wearing the mask of a grandfather. When he first smiled at my little sister, I saw in his eyes something no girl should ever recognize. But today I'm here to tell you how I survived, and how I delivered justice with my own hands. My name is Teresa Ann Rogers. I'm 85 years old now, but this story begins way back when I was just 16. In 1954, in a forgotten place called Pine Creek Hollow deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, a place so small it barely appeared on maps, nestled between high mountains that hid our darkest secrets from the rest of the world. Around these parts everyone knows me as Miss Terry the Quilter, because for more than 5 decades my fingers transformed thread and needles into flowers, birds, and dreams on the quilts, linens and dresses of local families. These hands, now wrinkled like dried apple skin, were once firm and determined, both for quilting and for doing what needed to be done when the time came. I was born into a simple but honorable family. My mother Josephine worked as a maid in the homes of coal mine owners, and sometimes washed clothes by the river to supplement our income. She was a small woman in body, but a giant in courage. As for my father, well, I only know the stories my mother told on nights by the oil lamp. His name was Benjamin. He left before I was even born, saying he was going to find work in the Pittsburgh steel mills, and never returned. Some said he died in a dispute with company guards, others that he had started another family. The truth died with my mother. We were 3 women in our home: my mother, myself, and my little sister Mary Catherine, whom everyone called Kathy, 7 years younger than me. We lived in a small wooden shack, a tin roof that needed reinforcing with every heavy rain, a dirt floor that I swept 3 times a day to keep clean and dust-free. We had little, but what little we had was neat, because my mother always said, poverty is no excuse for sloppiness. Before I continue my story, I'd like to ask for a moment of your time. If you're enjoying this old woman's tale, please leave a like and subscribe to my granddaughter's channel, who's helping me record this. Each subscription feels like a hug that I receive, and it gives me strength to continue sharing. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. This internet thing is a magical thing that allows me to enter your homes from all across America, and that warms my old heart. Our routine was simple but exhausting. We'd wake while the sky was still dark, with the first roosters crowing in the yard. My mother would prepare black coffee and cornbread when we had it, or just thin cornmeal mush on tighter days. Then she'd leave to work in other people's houses, and I'd stay looking after our little home. Little Kathy, the small garden we kept out back, and I'd still do some sewing I brought home to make extra money at night. When my mother returned exhausted, with swollen feet and hands red from scrubbing clothes and floors, she still found strength to tell us stories before we slept. Study, Teresa, she'd always tell me, only education will get you out of this life. And I studied what I could at the small rural school more than an hour's walk from our house. I learned to read and write, to do sums, and most importantly, I learned to dream of a different future. The teacher, Miss Celeste, said I had talent with my hands and with letters, that I could be a teacher someday. Who knows? Our life was hard, but there was affection. My mother, despite the exhaustion etched on her face, always had a tight hug, a lingering caress, a word of kindness. She sewed our clothes from scraps she got from her employers, working true miracles with fabrics nobody else wanted. She taught us values, respect, and most importantly, she taught us to be strong. A woman in a man's world has to be like a willow tree. She'd say bends and bends, but doesn't break. We weren't prepared for that October afternoon. The heat was already beginning to intensify, announcing that summer would arrive strong. That year my mother had left early for Mr. Thornton's house, the mine owner, to help prepare for a party. That weekend I was at home, teaching Kathy to stitch flowers onto an old piece of cloth, when I saw Mr. Thornton's son arriving on horseback with an expression that froze my blood. "It's your mother, Teresa," he said without dismounting. "There's been an accident. Come quickly." I took Kathy by the hand, and we ran barefoot, feeling the stones on the path hurting our feet, but barely noticing the pain. When we arrived at the estate, there was a small gathering in the barn where the wood stove was located. I pushed through the people and saw my mother stretched out On the dirt floor, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of her mouth, her face a strange color I had never seen before. Mrs. Thornton, the mine owner's wife, was kneeling beside her, crying and crossing herself. "It happened so fast, my dear," she told me, holding my hand. "Your mother was there roasting a ham in the oven, when suddenly she let out a moan, clutched her chest and fell. We didn't even have time to call the doctor. The town doctor, Dr. Arlington, arrived almost an hour later when there was nothing to do but confirm what everyone already knew. Heart," he said, closing his black bag. Stopped suddenly. She didn't suffer, as if that was consolation enough for two girls who had just become orphans in a world that forgives neither weakness nor solitude. The following days passed like a hazy nightmare. The Thornton family, in a rare gesture of kindness to people like us, paid for the simple coffin and the burial. I watched my mother descend into the earth in the small town cemetery, under a sky strangely blue and too beautiful for such a sad day. Kathy wouldn't stop crying, clinging to my skirt, not really understanding why mother had gone away. Without saying goodbye, we returned home that night, too girls alone in a hostile world. I lay down with Kathy in what had previously been just my bed, neither of us wanting to sleep in the empty bed that had belonged to our mother. I stayed awake all night listening to my sister's sobs as she slept, wondering what would become of us. We had no close relatives, no money, and the house where we lived was provided by one of the mine owners my mother worked for. The answer came 3 days after the burial, in the form of a man I knew only from stories, some good, many bad. My maternal grandfather, Mr. Jeremiah, appeared at our door one Sunday morning, mounted on a skinny horse, bringing only a saddle bag with his belongings. He was a man of average height, but with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. Graying hair, unshaven beard, small deep-set eyes that seemed to evaluate everything around him, large calloused hands of someone who had spent his life working the land. "I've come to get you," he said, unceremoniously entering the house without asking permission. "I'm Josephine's father. You're coming to live with me now." What I knew about him was little, and none of it good. My mother rarely spoke of her father, and when she did, there was bitterness in her voice. I knew my grandmother had died more than 10 years ago, that he lived alone on a small property a few miles away, raising a few animals and growing a subsistence crop. I also knew that he and my mother had severed ties when she became pregnant with me out of wedlock, and that he had thrown her out of the house, saying he wouldn't raise a shameless daughter. But at that moment, what choice did we have? It was either him or complete abandonment, perhaps separation between me and Kathy, perhaps an even worse life serving as a maid in some family's house, where we wouldn't even have the right to our own names. "Pack whatever's yours," he ordered, looking with contempt at our poverty. "Only what fits in a burlap sack, the rest stays." So with my heart as tight as a clenched fist, and my throat dry with fear disguised as courage, I packed our few clothes, Kathy's rag doll, my mother's old Bible, and the yellowed photograph of her that we kept as a treasure. Everything fit in a single sack, which my grandfather tied to his horse's saddle. "The little one comes with me on the horse you follow on foot," he said, lifting Kathy and placing her in front of the saddle without gentleness, but also without brutality. I looked one last time at the shack that, despite all the difficulties, had been our home, the place where my mother had raised us with so much love. I felt tears wanting to come, but I swallowed them forcefully. I wouldn't cry in front of this man, who, from what little I could tell, despised any sign of what he considered weakness. Thus began our new life, a walk of more than 3 hours to my grandfather's property, me following the skinny horse along the dirt road, feeling blisters forming on my feet, dust sticking to the sweat on my face, uncertainty sticking to my soul. Kathy rode silently, her eyes red from crying so much, holding firmly to the horse's saddle. When we finally arrived, I saw a simple wooden house, but larger than ours, a small corral with some skinny cows, a pig pen with half a dozen pigs, a chicken coop, and a cultivated area where corn, potatoes, and beans grew. It was a modest property, but self-sufficient. No one would go hungry there, I thought. And that was something. "You'll stay in the back room," my grandfather said, dismounting and helping Kathy down. "There's just one bed, but it'll do for 2. Tomorrow morning we'll talk about the house rules." That first night was too strange. The straw mattress was hard, the pillow thin, and the room smelled of mold, as if no one had slept there for a long time. I hugged Kathy, who was quietly whimpering, calling for our mother, and promised myself that no matter what happened I would protect my little sister. I didn't know exactly what or who I needed to protect her from, but there was something in my grandfather's gaze that left me uneasy, a shadow that passed through those small eyes when he looked at us, especially at Kathy. I couldn't imagine that night how accurate my premonition was, nor what we would face in the following months, nor did I imagine that the roof that sheltered us from the rain would transform into a prison, or that the man who took us in out of blood obligation would reveal the demon he carried inside. Much less did I imagine that these hands, which today make delicate quilts, would one day be stained with blood in the name of justice that no one else would deliver. For us, the first days at my grandfather's house were difficult to adapt to, like a new shoe that hurts until it breaks, and it quickly became clear that Mr. Jeremiah hadn't brought us in out of affection or family obligation, but for his own interest. He needed hands for the housework, which he had been doing alone for years since my grandmother died, and there in that isolated property 2 girls were worth more than a hired hand. They cost nothing beyond the food they ate. Nobody eats for free here, he said on the first morning, while the sun had barely risen properly, and I was already up trying to understand how the rusty wood stove worked. Let's make the rules clear. You, Teresa, will take care of the house, the food, and the laundry. The little one helps where she can. I'll take care of the crops and the animals. On Sunday mornings we'll go to church in the village, so nobody says I'm raising 2 girls without fear of God. I accepted in silence, because deep down I had already expected this. After all, what choice did a 16-year-old girl have with a small child to care for? No money, no completed education, no other relatives. The world is not a gentle place for women alone, much less for girls. Soon the routine was established. Wake before the sun, prepare coffee for grandfather, tend to the chickens, make lunch, wash clothes in the creek that ran behind the property, clean the house, tend the garden, help Kathy with the lessons I taught her myself, since the nearest school was too far to walk to. Every day at night after serving dinner to my grandfather, I would still mend clothes, shell corn, peel potatoes. The work never ended. Kathy, even at just 9 years old, did what she could. She swept the yard, fed the chickens, helped me hang laundry. She was a sweet girl with a smile that brightened the gluiest day. Even with all the pain of losing our mother, she still found beauty in small things: a blue butterfly in the garden, a baby bird that fell from its nest, the first stars appearing in the night sky. Terry, she would sometimes ask me when we were alone, do you think Mama can see us from heaven? I'm sure she can, I would answer, swallowing the lump in my throat. And I'm sure she's proud of how you're growing up strong and good. For almost 3 months things went on like this, hard but bearable. My grandfather hardly spoke to us beyond what was necessary. He spent his days in the fields or tending the animals, and his nights drinking moonshine, sitting on the porch smoking those corn husk cigarettes he rolled himself. Sometimes I caught him looking at us with a strange expression, especially at Kathy, but I thought it was just his way, an old bitter man who didn't know how to deal with children, until the night came that changed everything. A night of heavy rain with thunderclaps that made the old house shake. Kathy and I were in our bed, hugging each other, trying to sleep despite the noise of the storm. My grandfather had drunk more than usual that night. It was the day he received his small pension payment, and he always came back from town more drunk on those days. I woke to the creaking of the bedroom door in the dark. I could only see his silhouette standing in the doorway, holding the oil lamp that cast distorted shadows on the walls. Come here, girl, he called, his voice slurred from drink. I thought he was talking to me, but I soon saw that his eyes, gleaming in the yellowish light of the lamp, were fixed on Kathy, who was still asleep. What is it, Grandpa? I asked, already sitting up in bed, my heart racing without knowing exactly why. Not you, he replied, his voice carrying a restrained irritation. The little one, I want to show her something. It's late, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear that was beginning to grow. Kathy's already asleep, you can show her tomorrow. He took a step into the room, and the smell of moonshine and sweat invaded the small space. Don't tell me what to do in my own house, insolent girl, he growled. I'm the man here. You eat what I give you, you sleep under my roof. Now wake that girl up and tell her to come with me. At that moment, something snapped inside me. I can't explain it, but it was as if I could see with absolute clarity what would happen if I let Kathy go with him, as if all the stories I had heard whispered by the women of the region about drunk men and defenseless girls materialized before my eyes. She's not going anywhere, I said, standing up and positioning myself between the bed and him. You go back to your room and sleep, Grandpa. The drink is talking for you. I saw something pass across his face, anger, surprise, and then a smile that chilled me to the bone. You've always been too forward, he said, taking another step toward me, just like your mother, thinking you're in charge of something. But I'll teach you your place. When he raised his hand to hit me, I didn't back down. I took the slap with full force, tasting the metallic flavor of blood in my mouth, but I didn't move from my spot. If he was going to get past me, he would have to knock me down first. Kathy woke up with the noise and started crying, frightened. This seemed to worsen his mood. Shut up, you crybaby. I'll give you a real reason to cry if you don't stop right now. That's when I pushed him with all the strength a 16-year-old girl could muster. I pushed that grown man, making him stagger backward, surprised by the attack he wasn't expecting. Get out of here, I shouted, grabbing the lamp he had left on a small table and raising it like a weapon. Get out of our room now, or I swear I'll set fire to you in this whole house. He must have seen something in my eyes, some wild determination that even I didn't know I had, because he backed up to the door, glaring at me with hatred. This isn't over, he threatened, pointing his finger at me. We'll talk tomorrow when I'm sober and you're less crazy. After he left, I secured the door with the makeshift lock. We had a piece of wood that fit between the door and the door frame. It wasn't much, but it would give some warning if he tried to enter again. I went back to the bed, hugging Kathy, who was trembling with fear. What did Grandpa want, Terry? She asked between sobs. Nothing important, I lied, stroking her hair. He drank too much and was confused. Go to sleep, little one. I'm here. Nothing bad will happen to you. But while she fell back asleep in my arms, I stayed awake all night, my eyes fixed on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Something had changed that night, something fundamental. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The next morning, my grandfather acted as if nothing had happened. He drank the coffee I prepared in silence, then went out to the fields as he always did. But there was a tension in the air as dense as the fog that covered the fields on winter mornings. I knew that this had been just the beginning. I spent the entire day on alert, keeping Kathy always close by, never leaving her alone even for a moment. At night, when I heard his footsteps approaching our room, I pushed the heavy dresser against the door, making enough noise so he would know we were awake, and prepared. The footsteps stopped, hesitated, and then moved away. For that night we were safe, but I knew we couldn't continue like this forever. Sooner or later he would find a way. Sooner or later I would be distracted, tired, or simply not strong enough to stop him. It was 2 weeks later that the worst happened. I had gone to fetch water from the creek, leaving Kathy at home because she had a slight cold. It was a matter of minutes, the time it took to fill 2 buckets and return. But when I entered the kitchen, I didn't see her where I had left her, drawing at the small table near the stove. Kathy, I called, feeling a chill in my stomach that had nothing to do with the June wind. I heard a muffled sound coming from my grandfather's room, a restrained cry that I would recognize anywhere. I dropped the buckets on the floor, not caring about the spilled water, and ran. The door to his room was closed, but not locked. When I opened it, the scene I saw was burned into my memory forever like a hot iron. Bars leather. My grandfather was sitting on the bed, and Kathy, my God, my little Kathy, was on his lap. Her dress lifted, her skinny little legs exposed, her face contorted in pain and confusion. What do you think you're doing? He shouted when he saw me pushing Kathy to the side with such force that she fell to the floor. I didn't answer. I couldn't speak. Something primitive took over me. I was no longer Teresa, the obedient girl who accepted her fate. I was a force of nature, pure rage, pure protective instinct. I lunged at him without thinking, my nails aimed at his face, screaming words that I don't even remember. He caught me by the wrists, throwing me against the wall with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. Your mother was just the same, he said, getting up and coming toward me, his eyes filled with an old hatred, always thinking she was better than everyone else. That's why she was thrown out of here. That's why she died alone with no one. And you'll go the same way if you don't learn your place. When he raised his hand to hit me again, I saw Kathy rise behind him, grab a heavy metal candlestick that was on the dresser, and hit him with all her might on the back of his knee. It wasn't enough to bring him down, but it made him howl in pain. And turn around, I took advantage of the distraction to get up, grab Kathy by the hand, and run out of the room. We locked our bedroom door again, pushing everything heavy we had against it. I'm scared, Terry, Kathy cried, huddled in a corner of the bed. He hurt me. He said he was going to teach me to be a good girl, but it hurts so much. He won't hurt you anymore, I promised, hugging her so tightly that I could feel her little heart racing against mine. Never again. We're getting out of here. Where to? She asked, her big eyes full of tears. Good question. Where could we go? 2 girls alone with no money, no one. The nearest town was more than a day's walk away. We had no other living relatives that we knew of. The authorities would probably send us back, or worse, separate us. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But we'll find a place, I promised. That night, while Kathy finally slept, exhausted from crying so much, I stayed awake planning. We couldn't simply run away. We wouldn't survive even a week. We needed money, a plan, a destination, and we needed immediate safety. It was then that I began to understand that there was no easy way out, that sometimes the only possible justice is the one we deliver with our own hands, the justice that no one else would do for us, because no one cared about 2 poor girls in the middle of nowhere. As I listened to my grandfather's snores through the thin wall, I began to formulate a plan that would change our lives forever, that would stain my hands with blood, but that would give us the freedom and safety that Kathy deserved, that we both deserved. I looked at my hands in the weak moonlight that came through the window, still a girl's hands with recent calluses from hard work, hands that knew how to make bread, embroider flowers, braid hair, rock a child to sleep, hands that would soon know the weight of taking a life to save another. Whatever happens, Mama, I whispered into the darkness like a prayer, I hope you understand why, and that you are beside us when the time comes. In the days that followed that horrible afternoon, Kathy changed. The light in her eyes, that natural joy that not even our mother's death had completely erased, was now covered by a shadow. She hardly spoke or smiled. She slept poorly, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming, her small body trembling with terror from nightmares that she didn't need to tell me about for me to know what they were about. In me, I burned inside, an anger I had never felt before grew in me like a weed after rain, but I couldn't afford the luxury of losing control, of acting without thinking. Kathy needed me whole, strong, lucid. She needed an older sister who could also be mother, father, protector, healer of the soul. In the first days, I kept Kathy always by my side. I didn't leave her alone even for a minute. We slept locked in our room, the heavy dresser pushed against the door. During the day, we did the chores together. She accompanied me to fetch water, to wash clothes in the creek, to feed the chickens. Even when I needed to cook, I kept her sitting near the stove, telling her stories to distract her, singing the songs our mother used to sing. My grandfather, after that episode, backed off a bit. Perhaps he was frightened by my reaction. Perhaps he was just waiting for a better opportunity. He continued to look at us with those small, cold eyes, but kept his distance. Sometimes I caught him watching Kathy with a look that turned my stomach, but he would look away when he noticed I had caught him. What hurt me most was seeing my sister's awkward efforts to appear well, to not worry me. She tried to smile when she thought I was looking, made colorful drawings like before, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was as if a part of her had been buried in that room, along with the innocence that every child deserves to keep. Terry, she asked me one night when we were lying in the dark, why did Grandpa do that to me? Did I do something wrong? My heart broke into 1,000 pieces with that question. How do you explain to a 9-year-old child that there are monsters in the world, and that sometimes these monsters are from our own family? How to make her understand that it was never her fault, that nothing she could have done would justify or provoke that violence? No, my love, I answered, holding her little hands in mine. You did nothing wrong. Never. Grandpa is the one who is sick in the head and heart. Some people are like that. They do bad things even knowing they shouldn't, but that has nothing to do with you. You are perfect exactly as you are. Then why does it hurt so much in here? She asked, pointing to her chest. It feels like there's a hole. I had no easy answers. I couldn't promise that the pain would pass quickly, because I knew that wounds like that leave scars that last a lifetime. What I could do was be there, hold her hand in the darkness, protect her from more pain, and perhaps with great care and love help her rebuild a little of the lost confidence. The pain will pass gradually, I said with all the sincerity I could gather. It won't disappear completely, but it will get smaller, and meanwhile we're together. I won't let anything bad happen to you again, I promise. By our mother's memory, I began to think of ways to help her recover some joy, some sense of security. I remembered my mother's teachings, the herbs she knew, the stories she told about healing not just of the body, but of the soul as well. I started waking up earlier than usual before sunrise to gather herbs in the woods behind the house, basil to calm, lemon balm to help sleep, chamomile for the nerves. I made teas and gave them to Kathy, telling stories about how our mother said these plants had the power to drive out the shadows from the soul at night. When she had nightmares, I would sing softly in her ear lullabies I remembered from our childhood. I braided her hair every day, telling her each braid carried a special protection. It was superstitious, perhaps even foolish, but if it brought any comfort, it was worth it. A month after that terrible day, I began to notice small changes. Kathy started singing while washing her hands at the basin. I found her giving names to the chickens in the yard, talking to them as she used to do. One afternoon, I heard her laugh, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but still a laugh, when a newly hatched chick climbed onto her shoe. These were small signs of healing, fragile as the first shoots after frost, but they filled me with hope. My little sister was finding her way back to herself, step by step, day by day, and I would be there to support her every inch of that journey. Meanwhile, I continued planning. We had no money to escape, but I discovered that my grandfather kept a small metal box in the back of his wardrobe where he put the payment from his small pension. I began to observe his routine more carefully, noting when he went to town, when he returned, when he drank so much that he passed out on the porch. I also started paying more attention to conversations. When we went to church on Sundays, I heard the women talking about work in larger towns, about families looking for domestic help, about the new textile factory that had opened in Charleston, almost 100 miles away. It was on one of those Sunday mornings that I met Mrs. Matilda, a lady in her 60s, the widow of a merchant who had recently moved to the village. She seemed different from the other women there. She wore city clothes, talked about books and music, and had a gentle way of addressing children, including Kathy. Your little sister has intelligent eyes, she told me after church while we were sitting on the bench in the square. My grandfather had gone to wet his whistle at the bar with other men, as he did every Sunday, which gave us an hour or two of freedom. But there's a sadness in them that isn't natural in a child that age. I didn't respond immediately, wary. I wasn't used to strangers noticing things about us or caring. Life hasn't been easy, I finally said, keeping the details to myself. We lost our mother a few months ago. Mrs. Matilda nodded, her eyes fixed on mine in a way that seemed to see more than I wanted to show. And now you live with your grandfather, she completed. It wasn't a question. I know how it is. I also lost my mother early, was also raised by relatives who didn't have the best of hearts. Something in the way she said that made me feel I was in front of someone who would understand, who might have gone through similar things. Even so, I kept my guard up. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. If you need anything, she continued, writing something on a piece of paper she took from her purse. I live in the blue house at the end of the main street. The door is always open for you too. I kept that paper like a talisman. I didn't know if I would ever have the courage to knock on that door, to trust that stranger with our story, but it was comforting to know that there was at least one person in the world who seemed to care. The weeks went by and I continued to be divided between caring for Kathy, keeping my grandfather at a distance, and planning our escape. Each night after my sister fell asleep, I would stay awake thinking about the possibilities, the risks, the consequences. I studied my grandfather's behavior, like someone studying a dangerous predator, his habits, his moments of vulnerability, his weaknesses. I noticed he always drank more on the first Friday of the month. When he received his payment, I noticed his sleep was deeper on warm nights. I noticed that behind all that brutality, there was an old man, and in many ways a weak one. One night, when I was sure Kathy was sleeping deeply thanks to the chamomile tea with a hint of lemon balm that I had prepared, I decided to explore he house. My grandfather had drunk too much at dinner and was now snoring in his room. Even so, I walked on tiptoe, avoiding the floorboards that I knew creaked. I entered the kitchen, looking for something that could help us. That's when I saw the bottle, a dark glass bottle that my grandfather kept high on the shelf with a homemade label that Read rat poison in crooked letters, poison for the rats that sometimes invaded the corn crib. I stood looking at that bottle for a long time, thinking how easy it would be a few drops in the moonshine he drank every night, a quick end to the nightmare we were living. Freedom, justice. I extended my hand, my fingers almost touching the glass, when I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, my heart in my throat, to see Kathy standing in the kitchen doorway, wide-eyed, hugging the rag doll I had made for her. Terry, what are you doing? Her innocent question brought me back to reality. What was I thinking? I, who had always been the good one, the responsible one, the one who obeyed the rules, I who had never hurt even an ant out of malice. I was there contemplating taking a life, even if it was the life of a monster. Even if it was for protection, would I be able to live with it? More importantly, did I want Kathy to live with it, with the weight of knowing that the sister she idolized was capable of something so final? Nothing. Little one, I answered, lowering my hand. Just looking for a medicine for your cough. Let's go back to bed, it's late. As I guided her back to our room, I realized I needed a different plan, one that wouldn't stain my hands with blood, that wouldn't transform one tragedy into an even greater one, a plan that would free us without destroying us in the process. It was then that I began to think about Mrs. Matilda and the offer she had made. Maybe it was time to trust someone. Maybe it was time to ask for help, not to kill my grandfather, but to escape from him, to save Kathy, to save us. That night, lying next to my sister, I felt a change within me. The anger was still there, heavy as a stone in my chest, but alongside it, something new was growing. Determination, not the desperate determination of someone who is cornered, but the calm determination of someone who has found a path. We're going to be all right, little one, I whispered, even knowing she was already asleep. One way or another, we're going to get out of here. And one day this pain you carry will just be an old scar that only hurts when it rains. And as the wind whistled through the poorly sealed window cracks, I made a silent promise to my mother's memory. I wouldn't let the monster who lived under the same roof as us destroy what remained of Kathy's innocence. I wouldn't let him steal our future, as he had already tried to steal our present. I would protect my little sister with all my strength, even if it meant doing things I never imagined myself capable of, because sometimes protection comes from unexpected places, and sometimes healing requires bitter medicine. And so, in that old house surrounded by shadows, two girls embraced against the world began to plan not just their escape but their liberation. We didn't yet know how this story would end, but we were determined to be not merely survivors, but protagonists of our own destiny. The next morning, I made my decision after spending the whole night turning possibilities over in my head, like someone sorting beans for weevils. I saw that I needed to act before it was too late. On that first Monday of July, as I served coffee to my grandfather, I observed his trembling hands from the hangover, his bloodshot eyes, and knew it was only a matter of time before he tried again. I'm taking Kathy with me today to wash clothes in the creek, I said casually, avoiding looking directly at him. The day's nice cool water will be good for her cough. He mumbled something without raising his eyes from his plate of grits and fried eggs. This was his normal state on mornings after drinking. Silent bad temper, headache, disinterest in anything beyond himself. It was the best time to leave the house. Without many questions, I prepared a bundle with some of our clothes, a piece of cornbread I had saved from the day before, and Kathy's rag doll. I hid everything inside the dirty laundry basket, covering it with sheets we were supposedly going to wash. If my grandfather saw us leaving with a bundle, he'd be suspicious right away. Come on, little one, I called to Kathy, who was in the yard feeding corn to the chickens. Today you're going to help me scrub the clothes. The path to the creek was long, almost half an hour's walk along a trail that wound between pastures and small stretches of woods. It was the same path we traveled twice a week to wash clothes, so it wouldn't raise suspicions. Instead of heading to our usual spot, though, I took the fork that led to the village. Where are we going, Terry? Kathy asked, confused by the change in route. We're going to make a visit before washing the clothes, I answered, squeezing her little hand in mine. Remember Mrs. Matilda, the lady from church who talked to us last Sunday? We're going to her house. Kathy nodded without further question. She trusted me completely, and that increased my responsibility even more. I couldn't take a false step, couldn't risk the little security we had, as illusory as it might be. The village was quiet at that Hour of the morning, some women were sweeping the sidewalks in front of their houses. A skinny dog was sleeping in the middle of the dirt street. The baker was arranging fresh bread in the window of the small store that sold a bit of everything. Nobody paid much attention to us. Two girls with a laundry basket were a common sight around there. Mrs. Matilda's house was at the end of the main street. As she had said, it was a simple but well-kept building painted light blue with flower pots on the small porch. I stood in front of the wooden gate for a few minutes, my courage faltering. What if she didn't believe me? What if she told my grandfather we had been there? What if everything got even worse? Are we going in or not, Terry? Kathy asked, impatient with my hesitation. Before I could answer, the door of the house opened, and Mrs. Matilda appeared, wearing an apron over her simple dress, her gray hair tied in a loose bun. I thought I heard voices, she said, smiling at us. What a nice surprise. Come and come. And I just made a cornbread that's cooling. There was something in her smile, in the way her wrinkled eyes looked at us without judgment, that gave me courage. I opened the gate, and we went in, Kathy skipping ahead of me, attracted by the mention of cornbread. The house inside was as welcoming as its owner's simple but well-maintained furniture. Lace curtains at the windows, a black cat sleeping on a cushion, the sweet smell of freshly baked cornbread mixed with fresh coffee. Sit down, she invited, indicating the kitchen table covered with an embroidered tablecloth. I'll serve some coffee with milk for you, Teresa, and a glass of milk with honey for the little one. This cool weather calls for something warm in the belly. As she moved around the kitchen preparing everything, I was surprised by the fact that she remembered our names. Even more surprising was the naturalness with which she treated us, as if our visit wasn't unexpected, as if she had known us for a long time. After we were seated with Kathy already on her second slice of cornbread, Mrs. Matilda looked me directly in the eyes. Now tell me, my child, what brings you two here so early with that laundry basket that clearly doesn't contain just clothes to wash? I swallowed hard, surprised by her perception. For a moment I thought about making up an excuse, saying we were just passing by, but something in her look, a look that seemed to say, I know, I understand, broke my last resistance. And then I told her everything. I spoke about our mother's death, how we ended up at our grandfather's house, the first difficult but bearable months, and finally in a lower voice so that Kathy, now playing with the cat in the corner of the kitchen, wouldn't hear. I told her about that terrible night and what had happened to my sister. Mrs. Matilda listened to everything in silence, just nodding occasionally. She showed no shock or disbelief, only a deep understanding and a controlled anger that I saw appear at the corners of her mouth. You're not the first, she said finally after I finished my account, and unfortunately, you won't be the last. Men like your grandfather exist everywhere, hidden behind masks of respectability, protected by the silence of communities, by the fear of victims. There was something in the way she spoke that made me realize it wasn't just empathy, it was personal experience. What are we going to do now? I asked, my voice trembling with fear and hope mixed together. We can't go back if he finds out, I told. And you won't go back, she affirmed with a certainty that comforted me, at least not to stay under the same roof as him. But you also can't simply disappear. Your grandfather has legal rights over you, as unfair as that may be. If you run away, he can report your disappearance, and the authorities will look for you. My heart sank. I hadn't thought of that in my mind. We just needed to flee far away, start a new life in another town, but of course it wouldn't be that simple. So there's no way out? I asked, feeling the tears I had held back for so long finally beginning to fall. I didn't say that, Mrs. Matilda replied, covering my hand with hers. I just said we need to be smarter than him, and for that, my dear, we need to deliver justice. The word justice hung between us, loaded with meanings. It wasn't official justice of the sheriffs and judges, who rarely believed poor girls against adult men. It was another kind of justice, older, more definitive. How I whispered, part of me afraid of the answer, part of me already knowing what she would say. The same way people like your grandfather always fall by their own vices, she answered, her eyes fixed on mine. He drinks a lot, right? And from what you said, he gets completely unconscious some nights. I nodded, beginning to understand where that conversation was going. Accidents happen all the time with drunk men, Mrs. Matilda continued, her voice calm, as if she were talking about the weather. They fall into wells, trip over stones, pass out with lit cigarettes and set the house on fire. Nobody questions these accidents, much especially when the victim has the reputation. Your grandfather has. A shiver ran down my spine. She was proposing exactly what I had considered myself that night in the kitchen, when my fingers almost touched the poison bottle. But hearing the plan formulated this way with such coldness made everything more real, more frightening. I don't know if I can do that, I confess, my voice barely audible. I didn't say you would have to do it, my child, she replied, an enigmatic smile on her lips. Just that it would need to happen, and some things are better left in the hands of someone with experience. I looked at her with new eyes, perceiving the layers of mystery in this woman, who had seemed so ordinary at first glance. Who was Mrs. Matilda really? What did she know about convenient accidents and justice delivered by one's own hands? Why, I finally asked, why would you help us this way? You hardly know us. She was silent for a moment, her eyes lost in some distant point as if she were seeing the past. Because no one helped me when I was in your little sister's place, she finally answered, her voice carrying an old pain. Because I promised myself many years ago that if I could ever prevent another girl from going through what I went through, I would do whatever was necessary. And because in the world we live in, my dear, sometimes the only possible justice is the one we deliver with our own hands. I looked at Kathy, who was playing innocently with the cat, unaware of the dark conversation happening just a few feet away from her. I thought of all she had already suffered, the pain I saw in her eyes that terrible afternoon, the nightmares that woke her up screaming. I also thought about my mother, how she had protected us while she could, how she would expect me to continue protecting Kathy now that she was no longer here. What do we need to do? I finally asked. The decision made. Mrs. Matilda smiled, not a smile of joy but of shared determination. First, you'll stay here today. I'll send a message to your grandfather saying I found you feeling sick on the way to the creek and brought you to my house. That gives us time. Tomorrow you'll go back to his house as if nothing happened, as if it were just another normal day. And Kathy, she stays with me. We'll say she's still weak with a fever. Your grandfather won't care much from what you said. He prefers when you're not around during the day. She got up, went to an old cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, and came back with a small dark glass bottle. This here, she explained, is an extract of herbs I know well, harmless in small doses, calms the nerves, helps with sleep. In larger doses it causes a deep sleep, almost homeostasis, and mixed with alcohol. She left the sentence hanging, but I understood perfectly the implication. When he's completely unconscious, the rest happens. A regrettable accident, a candle knocked over near the old curtains, a fall into the well in the yard, a fatal stumble on the cellar stairs. I haven't decided yet which will be more convincing, but I have until tomorrow night to plan. And after I asked, my mouth dry from the tension, after, my dear, you'll live with me as my nieces who came from the city. Nobody will question it much. I'm a widow. I have a small pension from my late husband, and this house is too big for an old woman alone. With time, the story of your grandfather will become just another sad case of an old drunk who died through carelessness, and you too will have the chance to grow up in peace, to heal the wounds, to have the childhood you deserve. It seemed too simple, too perfect, but at that moment I clung to this plan like a shipwreck victim clings to a piece of wood in the high seas. It was our only chance, our only hope of escaping the nightmare we were living. What if something goes wrong? I asked, giving voice to the fear I couldn't completely push away. Mrs. Matilda held my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman of her age. Nothing will go wrong, she affirmed with absolute confidence, because when we protect those we love, the universe conspires in our favor. And because, my dear Teresa, this isn't the first time I've delivered justice this way. That statement should have frightened me, but strangely it reassured me. There was a strength in that woman, a fierce determination that reminded me of my own mother. And for the first time in months, I felt that we weren't alone in the world anymore, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of our particular hell. That night Kathy slept peacefully in a soft bed with clean sheets, the black cat curled up at her feet like a silent guardian, and I, for the first time since my mother's death, allowed myself to truly cry, not tears of despair or fear, but tears of relief, of hope, and yes, of a dark anticipation for what would come the following night. Because if there's one thing I learned too early in this life, it's that sometimes we need to become the monster to defeat the monster, and that in this unjust world some people only understand the language of violence that they themselves have taught. The next morning I woke, before the sun, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum on feast day. Mrs. Matilda was already in the kitchen preparing oatmeal with cinnamon that filled the house with its comforting aroma. Kathy was still asleep, curled up like a little animal between the clean sheets, her face finally at peace without the worry lines that had become so common in recent times. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Matilda asked, handing me a cup of strong black coffee. "No," I answered honestly, "but I'll do what needs to be done anyway." She smiled in that enigmatic way of hers, her eyes shining with an ancient wisdom. "That's how true courage works, my child. It's not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it." I ate in silence, trying to control the trembling in my hands. The small bottle that Mrs. Matilda had shown me the night before now rested in the pocket of my dress, heavy as a stone, constantly reminding me of what I was about to do. Before leaving, I went to the room where Kathy was sleeping. I kissed her forehead, gently inhaling the scent of her hair, memorizing the image of her at peace, protected. "I'll be back soon, little one," I whispered, even knowing she couldn't hear me. "And when I return, we'll start a new life, I promise." The path back to my grandfather's house never seemed so long. Each step was like walking against a strong wind. Each yard conquered with effort of the soul more than of the body. I carried with me only the laundry basket, now with some washed pieces that Mrs. Matilda had provided to maintain the appearance of normality. When I arrived, my grandfather was sitting on the porch smoking his corn husk cigarette, his eyes half closed against the morning sun. He didn't seem particularly concerned about our absence during the night. The message Mrs. Matilda had sent through the baker's son, explaining that we were at her house because Kathy had fallen ill, had been enough to calm any suspicion. "Where's the little one?" he asked when he saw me, his voice rough from tobacco and from the moonshine of the night before. "Still at Mrs. Matilda's house," I answered, avoiding looking directly at him. "The fever didn't go down. She thought it better to keep Kathy there another day." He grunted in response, showing neither concern nor relief to him. Kathy was just a nuisance, one more mouth to feed, or worse, an object for his basest instincts. The thought made my blood boil, and I had to concentrate to keep my expression neutral. "Is there food ready?" he asked, throwing his cigarette butt on the ground. "Not yet. I'll make it right now." The day dragged on in a tension that only I felt. I did the usual chores, cooked, cleaned, fed the animals, weeded a part of the garden. My grandfather went to the fields as on any other day, came back for lunch, then went out again to check a broken fence in the pasture. Everything so normal, so everyday. While inside, I was boiling with anxiety and determination. In the afternoon, I prepared with special care the dinner that would be his last. I killed a fat chicken, made a stew with potatoes and herbs, baked cornbread in the wood oven. I wanted it to be a special meal, not out of consideration for him, but because I needed him to eat well, to drink plenty, to be satisfied and drowsy when he returned in the late afternoon. The smell of food already permeated the whole house. I saw his eyes glisten with greed when he saw the table set, the golden chicken in the center, the bottle of moonshine that I had strategically placed within his reach. "What's the occasion?" he asked, suspicious. He wasn't used to so many favors. "Nothing special," I answered with my back to him, stirring something on the stove so he wouldn't see my face. "I just thought you deserved a good dinner after working all day fixing that fence." The mention of his hard work quelled any suspicion men like my grandfather melt with recognition, especially coming from women they consider inferior. He sat at the table with a satisfied smile, already filling his first glass of moonshine. "You should do this more often," he commented between one bite and another. "Good food like this." "Yes, sir," I agreed, serving him again, careful to keep his glass always full. "I will do it more often." While he ate and drank, I kept myself busy in the kitchen, waiting for the right moment. I needed him to be drunk enough not to notice the slightly bitter taste that the contents of the bottle would add to the drink, but not so drunk that he'd fall asleep before taking the dose. The moment came when he was on his third plate of food, already halfway through the bottle of moonshine. His eyes were glazed, his speech beginning to slur, but he was still conscious and alert enough to continue eating with gusto. "I'll get more moonshine," I announced, taking the almost empty bottle. "This one's running out." I went to the kitchen, my heart beating so fast I could hear it in my Ears with trembling hands, I took the bottle from my pocket, opened it, and poured all the contents into the new bottle of moonshine I had set aside. I shook it to mix well, took a few deep breaths to calm myself, and returned to the dining room. "Here, a new bottle," I said, placing it beside him. He didn't even thank me, just took the bottle and filled his glass again. I watched him drink a long and deep gulp and forced myself not to look away, not to show any sign of the turmoil eating me up inside. "The food's too good today," he commented, his voice already dragging. "Should have killed your mother earlier if I'd known you'd cook like this." The phrase, said without thinking in the rawness of intoxication, was like a knife stab. So that's what he thought, that my mother's death had been a benefit, because now he had a better cook. The hatred I felt at that moment almost made me lose control, almost made me shout all the truths I kept in my throat. But I contained myself. It wasn't time for emotional outbursts, it was time to wait, to observe, to ensure the plan proceeded as planned. "I'll tidy up the kitchen," I said, moving away from the table. "You can make yourself comfortable." He didn't seem to hear me properly anymore. His eyes were half closed, his head beginning to droop forward. The effect of the mixture was faster than I had expected, or perhaps it was just the combination of the day's fatigue, the full belly, and the strong drink from the kitchen. I watched as he struggled to stay awake, filling one more glass out of pure habit. His movements were uncoordinated, his hands spilling part of the drink on the table. Finally, after a few more minutes, I saw his head fall forward, the glass slipping from his loose fingers and rolling across the table. I approached cautiously. "Grandpa," I called softly. No response. "Grandpa," I repeated louder, shaking his shoulder. Nothing. He was completely unconscious, a heavy snore coming from his half-open mouth, a thread of drool running down the corner of his lips. I ran to the window and lit the oil lamp, placing it on the windowsill as we had agreed, the signal to Mrs. Matilda that it was time. Then I sat in the chair across from him and waited, observing the face of the man who had turned our life into a nightmare. I don't know how much time passed until I heard the soft knocks on the back door. When I opened it, Mrs. Matilda was there, dressed in black, as silent as a shadow. "Is it done?" she asked, entering the kitchen. "Yes," I answered, pointing to the dining room. "He's completely out. Not even an earthquake would wake him now." She nodded, her eyes shining with the determination I had never seen in anyone. "Good, now go to the house and get your things, and Kathy's just the essentials. Leave the rest." "And what will you?" I started to ask, but she interrupted me with a gesture. "The less you know, the better. Go, and when you return to my house, comfort your sister. She woke up after you left and is worried." I obeyed without questioning. Something in her voice and the firmness of her orders left no room for doubts or hesitations. I went to our room and filled a bundle with our few clothes, Kathy's doll that had been left behind, our mother's old Bible, the yellowed portrait of her that we kept as a treasure. When I returned to the kitchen, Mrs. Matilda was no longer there. I heard noises coming from my grandfather's room, the sound of drawers being opened, things being moved. Minutes later, she reappeared, putting something in the pocket of her dress that I couldn't identify. "Let's go," she said. Simply, we left through the back door, closing it silently behind us. The night was clear, with an almost full moon lighting the path. We walked in silence along the trail that led back to the village, me carrying our small bundle, her with firm steps ahead of me, as if she knew the path by heart. Even in the dim light, we were almost reaching the main road when we heard at first a distant boom, then the orange glow tearing the darkness behind us. I turned instinctively and saw the flames, high, fierce, uncontrollable, devouring the house where we had lived for the past few months, the house where my grandfather, unconscious from drink and the drug, was probably still sitting at the table. "Don't look back," Mrs. Matilda ordered, gripping my arm firmly. "What's done is done now. We only look forward." The rest of that night is a blur in my memory. I remember arriving at Mrs. Matilda's house, finding Kathy awake, sitting in the living room hugging the black cat, her eyes wide with worry. I remember her running into my arms when she saw me, the sweet smell of her hair, the warmth of her thin little body against mine. "Where were you, Terry?" she asked, her voice thick with contained crying. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back. I'm here now, little one," I answered, holding her face between my hands. "And I'll never leave your side again, never again." Late at night, when Kathy was already sleeping deeply, I heard knocks on the front door, Mrs. Matilda, who was sitting with me in the kitchen drinking an herbal tea, got up calmly. "It must be the sheriff," she said, smoothing her apron. "Stay here, let me talk to him." From the shadows of the kitchen I heard the conversation in the hallway, the sheriff, a middle-aged man with a deep voice and heavy accent, telling about the fire, about how the house had burned to the ground, about how they had found a charred body in the ruins, presumably my grandfather's. A tragedy, I heard Mrs. Matilda say, her voice carrying a sadness that I knew was completely false. "This drinking vice, how many lives has it taken? Probably fell asleep with his cigarette lit." "Probably," the sheriff agreed. "And the girls, his granddaughters? Do you know where they are?" "Here with me," she answered promptly. "The little one was sick. I brought them both to spend a few days here while she recovered." "Thank goodness they weren't there when it happened." "Thank goodness," repeated the sheriff. "And now what will become of them?" "They'll stay with me, of course," Mrs. Matilda affirmed with a calm certainty. "I'm a widow, I have space, and I've always wanted to have daughters. They're two good girls who have already suffered too much. They deserve a home, a real family." There was a silence, and I imagined the sheriff pondering the situation. Finally, I heard him say, "If you need anything to formalize the situation, just let me know." "Thank you, Sheriff. Now if you'll excuse me, the hour is late, and I have 2 children to console tomorrow when they learn the news." When the door closed and Mrs. Matilda returned to the kitchen, our eyes met in the dim light. There was no need for words. She knew I had heard everything, and I knew she had done exactly what she promised. "Freed us, given us a new chance, a new life. Go rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow will be a full day. We have a whole lifetime ahead to build." And so our rebirth began. In the days that followed, we played the part of recent orphans, receiving the condolences of the villagers with bowed heads and teary eyes. No one questioned the official version of events. An old drunk who fell asleep with his cigarette lit, a sad but predictable tragedy. No one mourned much either. My grandfather wasn't a beloved person in the community, with his harsh personality and solitary habits. With time we adapted to the new life with Mrs. Matilda. Kathy began to smile again, to sing, to play like the child she was. The nightmares didn't disappear completely. Some wounds are too deep to heal without leaving scars, but they became less frequent, less intense. I learned the art of healing from Mrs. Matilda, not just with herbs and medicinal plants, but also the healing of the soul, of the spirit. I learned that sometimes justice must be delivered by our own hands, especially when the world turns a blind eye to the suffering of the weakest. Years passed. I grew up, became a woman, learned the quilting craft from Mrs. Matilda, and eventually opened my own business in the larger town. Kathy became a teacher, fulfilling the dream our mother had for me. She married, had children, lived the full life she deserved. Mrs. Matilda left us when I was 31, departing quietly in her sleep in the same peaceful and determined way she had lived. She left the blue house to us, along with her knowledge, her books, her recipes for cures and poisons, and the wisdom that only women who have known the worst of life and survived can possess. Today, at 85 years old, looking back, I feel no remorse for what we did on that distant July night. I feel only the certainty of having done what needed to be done to protect my little sister, to honor my mother's memory, to ensure that another generation of girls wouldn't grow up under the shadows of fear and violence. Some people would call me a murderer. If they knew the story, others might understand. I don't care about judgments. I've lived long enough to know that justice and law don't always walk together, and that sometimes the hands that save are the same ones that need to destroy. If you've made it this far in the story, my dear, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to hear accounts like this, but it's important that these stories be told, that these secrets come to light, so that other girls in similar situations know they're not alone, that there is a way out, that there is healing, that there is a future beyond the pain. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription helps us reach more people, touch more lives, give voice to those who for so long were silenced. Life can break us in 1,000 ways, my dears, but the choice to remain broken, or to gather the pieces and build something new, something beautiful, something meaningful, that choice is always ours. And as long as there is one of us to tell the story, to pass on the wisdom acquired in the fire of adversity, no suffering will have been completely in vain. May God bless each one of you who watches me, And may you never lack the courage to do what needs to be done when the time comes.